My name is Kevin, and at 32, I finally found the love of my life in Sophia. I spent 5 years saving $50,000 for our dream wedding, despite my parents always favoring my younger brother Jackson. What should have been the happiest day announcing our engagement turned into a nightmare when my father demanded I hand over my wedding fund to my brother. When I refused, he slapped me so hard, everyone gasped. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up to family. Trust me. What happened after I called the police shocked everyone in that room. Growing up in Chicago, in a middle-class neighborhood, I never had much, but my parents, Thomas and Margaret, always made sure we had the essentials. My dad worked as an accountant at a small firm while my mom was a part-time nurse at the local hospital. They struggled financially throughout my childhood, but I always felt loved, even though there were signs that something wasn't quite right in how they treated me versus my brother. Jackson came along when I was 4, and from the beginning, there was a noticeable difference in how my parents doted on him. When I needed new shoes for school, they were the budget options from the discount store. When Jackson needed shoes, somehow they always found money for the name brand ones he wanted. When I asked for help with college applications, they told me to figure it out myself, because that was how I would learn responsibility. When Jackson applied to colleges, they hired a consultant to help him perfect his applications. Despite these differences in treatment, I worked hard, really hard. I won academic scholarships that covered most of my tuition at the state university, but I still needed to work 3 part-time jobs to cover rent, food, and books. I worked at the university library in the mornings, delivered pizzas in the evenings, and took weekend shifts at a warehouse. Sleep was a luxury I rarely enjoyed, but I was determined to graduate debt-free. After graduation, I threw myself into building my career as a software engineer. The first job didn't pay much, but I gained valuable experience. Within 3 years, I had moved to a better company with a substantial raise. By year 5, I was headhunted by one of the top tech firms in the country with a 6-figure salary package. Through all of this, I lived frugally, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates, driving an old but reliable car, and cooking at home instead of eating out. Meanwhile, Jackson dropped out of college after 2 years. My parents paid his full tuition at a private university, but he claimed it wasn't the right fit for him. He bounced from job to job, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months. Yet somehow, he always had the newest iPhone, took vacations to exotic locations, and drove a car much nicer than mine. Now it made sense why my parents were always short on cash whenever I needed anything growing up. Everything changed when I met Sophia at a tech conference in San Francisco 3 years ago. She was presenting a panel on user experience design, and I was immediately captivated by her intelligence, confidence, and genuine warmth. After her presentation, I worked up the courage to ask her a question about her talk, which led to coffee, which led to dinner that night. By the end of the conference weekend, we had spent nearly every available minute together, talking about everything from design principles to our favorite childhood books. Sophia came from a wealthy family. Her father, James, owned a successful chain of high-end furniture stores, and her mother, Diana, was a retired corporate attorney. Despite their wealth, they had raised Sophia to be grounded, hardworking, and appreciative. She had earned her own success as a UX designer and never flaunted her family's money or connections. When we started dating long distance between Chicago and San Francisco, I worried the distance would be too much. But we made it work, alternating weekend visits and daily video calls. After a year, she was offered a position at a design firm in Chicago, and we moved in together. That was when I knew she was the one, and I started saving specifically for our wedding. Every month, I put aside a portion of my salary into a special account I labeled simply Wedding Fund. I never touched it, not even when my car broke down and I had to take the bus for 3 months until I could save up for repairs from my regular savings. By the time I was ready to propose, the account had grown to $50,000, enough for the wedding of our dreams without borrowing from Sophia's parents, who had offered to contribute. The day I proposed was perfect. I took Sophia to the Botanical Gardens where we had our first date in Chicago, hired a string quartet to play her favorite song, and got down on one knee surrounded by roses in full bloom. She said yes before I even finished asking the question, tears streaming down her face as I slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't the most expensive ring, but I had spent months researching the perfect design that would suit her taste and personality. When we called our families to share the news, Sophia's parents were overjoyed. They immediately offered to host an engagement party at their country club and began planning how they could help with the wedding. My parents seemed happy too, though in retrospect, their enthusiasm was more subdued. They congratulated us and said they looked forward to meeting Sophia's family at the engagement party. In the weeks leading up to the engagement party, I was floating on air. Everything was coming together perfectly. Sophia and I started discussing wedding dates and venues, creating Pinterest boards and spreadsheets to organize our ideas. We both wanted a fall wedding, with rich colors and an intimate but elegant atmosphere. With our combined vision and my savings, it seemed entirely possible to have the wedding we both dreamed of without going into debt. I truly believed that my parents would be as supportive as Sophia's. Despite the favoritism they had shown Jackson growing up, they had seemed to accept my relationship with Sophia. I thought perhaps they had finally recognized that I had built a good life for myself through hard work and determination. I was hopeful that this engagement party would mark the beginning of a harmonious relationship between our two families, united in their happiness for us. How wrong I was. The first hint that something was wrong came about 2 months before our engagement party. Jackson had recently launched a small business venture selling specialty coffee beans online. He had convinced my parents to invest a significant amount of money to help him get started. I had cautioned them about investing more than they could afford to lose, especially given Jackson's track record with sticking to projects. But they dismissed my concerns. Sure enough, within 3 months, the business was failing. Jackson had underestimated the competition in the specialty coffee market and overestimated his own marketing skills. To make matters worse, I later found out he had been gambling away much of the business money at an underground poker game, hoping to multiply his profits quickly rather than building the business properly. Around this time, my parents started calling me more frequently than usual. At first, the conversations seemed normal, catching up about work, asking about Sophia, discussing wedding plans. But gradually, they began asking more pointed questions about my finances. How much was I making now? Had I received my annual bonus yet? Was my company offering stock options? These questions made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off as parents being parents interested in their son's financial well-being. The calls became more frequent. My mother would call just to tell me how proud she was that I was doing so well financially, followed by a story about how they were struggling to pay their property taxes or how the roof needed replacing. My father would mention in passing how much money they had loaned Jackson for his business, sighing heavily about the financial strain they were under. During one family dinner at their house, about 6 weeks before the engagement party, my mother casually mentioned a cousin whose son had just gotten married at the courthouse, with only 10 guests present. "That sounds sensible," she said, stirring her coffee. "Weddings these days are so extravagant. People spending tens of thousands of dollars for just one day seems so irresponsible." I noticed she was looking pointedly at me as she said this. I mentioned that Sophia and I had been saving specifically for our wedding, and we were comfortable with our budget. "But imagine what else you could do with that money," my father interjected. "A down payment on a house, investing for your future, helping family in need." I felt a tightness in my chest at his words, especially that last part. Helping family in need. Was that what this was about? Were they fishing for information about my wedding fund because they wanted me to bail out Jackson again? Sophia noticed their behavior too. After that dinner, as we drove home, she asked if my parents had always been so interested in our finances. "I've never seen parents so focused on their adult child's savings before," she said carefully. "My parents have always been the opposite. They refuse to even let me tell them my salary because they say it's none of their business." I defended my parents, making excuses about how they came from a generation that worried more about money, how they had struggled financially when we were growing up. But deep down, I was beginning to feel uneasy. 2 weeks before the engagement party, we had another dinner at my parents' house. This time, my mother spent the entire evening talking about Jackson, his financial troubles, how stressed he was, how unfair life had been to him. "He just needs a break," she said, her voice taking on that familiar pleading tone I had heard throughout my childhood whenever she wanted me to give up something for Jackson. My father was more direct. "You're doing so well, Kevin," he said. "Your brother is really struggling. Family should help family." I nodded noncommittally and changed the subject. But the tension in the room was palpable. Then, just as we were about to leave, Jackson showed up unexpectedly. He hugged our parents warmly but barely nodded at me and Sophia. Throughout his visit, which conveniently coincided with our departure, I noticed my parents exchanging meaningful glances with each other and with Jackson. Something was definitely up. On the drive home, Sophia was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "Kevin, I think your family is planning to ask you for money," she said gently. "The way they talk about your brother, the way they keep bringing up finances every time we see them, it's not normal." I sighed, finally allowing myself to acknowledge what I'd been feeling. "You're right. I've been making excuses for them, but something doesn't feel right." She took my hand. "Whatever happens, we're a team. We'll face it together." I squeezed her hand gratefully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. The engagement party was supposed to be one of the happiest occasions of our lives, but now I was approaching it with anxiety and apprehension. Still, I tried to remain hopeful that I was overthinking things, that my family would surprise me by being genuinely happy for us, without any ulterior motives. That hope was shattered when Jackson called me directly the following week. "Hey bro," he said, his voice overly casual. "I was wondering if I could borrow some cash, just temporarily, until my next venture takes off." I was taken aback by his directness. "How much are you talking about?" I asked cautiously. "Well, I need to pay back some guys about 20 grand, he said, as if he was asking to borrow $20. "But honestly, if you could spare 30 or 40,000, that would really set me up to start fresh." I nearly dropped my phone. $40,000 was almost my entire wedding fund. I told him there was no way I could lend him that kind of money. "Come on, man," he wheedled. "You're making 6 figures now. This is nothing to you. I'm your brother." I offered to lend him $2,000 to help with immediate expenses, but explained that I had been saving for my wedding and couldn't give him more. His friendly demeanor instantly vanished. "That's it?" he snapped. "After everything Mom and Dad have done for you? After all the times I've been there for you? Dad, Versin." His friendly demeanor, Talubal, and Versin. His friendly demeanor instantly vanished. I was stunned. When had Jackson ever been there for me? Before I could respond, he hung up. Within an hour, both my parents called. They were disappointed in me, they said. Family helps family. Jackson was in real trouble. Didn't I care about my brother? Didn't I want to help? The guilt trips continued all week. My mother cried on the phone about how I had abandoned my family now that I was successful. My father reminded me of every small thing they had ever done for me, conveniently forgetting all they had done for Jackson, or all I had accomplished on my own. Sophia's parents noticed something was wrong when we met with them to go over engagement party details. James, Sophia's father, pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I gave him a vague answer about family stress, but he seemed to see right through it. "Family dynamics can be complicated," he said kindly. "But remember, you're building your own family now with Sophia. Sometimes you have to prioritize that future." His words stayed with me, a lifeline of sanity in the increasingly stressful situation with my family. As the day of the engagement party approached, my anxiety grew. I had stress dreams about confrontations and arguments. Sophia suggested we could postpone the party, but I refused. I wouldn't let my family's issues ruin this special occasion. The morning of the engagement party, I received a text from my father. "We need to have a family discussion today. Important matters to resolve." My stomach dropped. I showed Sophia the message, and she wrapped her arms around me. "Whatever happens, we're in this together," she reminded me, "and my parents are behind us too." I nodded, trying to focus on the positive. This was our engagement party. We would be surrounded by friends and Sophia's loving family. Surely my parents wouldn't cause a scene in such a public setting. I held on to that hope as we dressed in our finest clothes and headed to the upscale restaurant where the party was being held. The engagement party was being held at Azure, one of the most elegant restaurants in Chicago, thanks to the generosity of Sophia's parents. The private room they had reserved overlooked the river, with floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the city skyline. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables decorated with arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus. It was more beautiful than I could have imagined, and for a brief moment as we entered, I forgot my anxiety about my family. Sophia's parents greeted us warmly at the entrance. Diana, Sophia's mother, looked elegant in a silver dress that complemented her salt and pepper hair. James, tall and distinguished with kind eyes, clapped me on the shoulder. "The man of the hour," he boomed cheerfully. "We couldn't be happier to welcome you to our family." Kevin. Their genuine affection only highlighted the stark contrast with my own family's recent behavior. I scanned the room anxiously and spotted my parents and Jackson huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed tones. They hadn't even noticed our arrival. When they did look up, my mother pasted on a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while my father and Jackson merely nodded in our direction. Sophia squeezed my hand reassuringly as guests began to arrive, a mix of our friends, colleagues, and extended family members. My best friend Adam arrived early, making a beeline for me after greeting Sophia. "Dude," he said in a low voice, "is everything okay with your family? They seem tense." I shrugged, not wanting to get into it. "Just the usual family drama," I said, trying to sound casual. Adam raised an eyebrow skeptically. He had known my family dynamics for years. "Well, I'm here if you need backup," he said. As more guests arrived, the atmosphere lightened. Sophia was radiant, moving from group to group, her hand rarely leaving mine. Her excitement was contagious, and I found myself relaxing despite the occasional glances I caught from my family. James, Sophia's father, seemed to have noticed the tension as well. He stationed himself strategically near me throughout the cocktail hour, smoothly intervening whenever my parents or Jackson approached with determined expressions. During dinner, seated at the head table with both sets of parents, I maintained light conversation, discussing wedding plans, and sharing the story of how Sophia and I met. My parents contributed little, offering only tight smiles and brief responses. Jackson, seated at a nearby table with cousins, kept glancing over with an unsettling smirk. After the main course, champagne was served for toasts. James gave a heartfelt speech about welcoming me to their family, bringing tears to many eyes. Sophia's maid of honor shared amusing anecdotes about our relationship. Adam stood up and recounted how he had never seen me happier than when I met Sophia. Then, surprisingly, my father stood up. For a moment, I dared to hope he would say something genuine and supportive. "Family is everything," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "And today, as we celebrate Kevin and Sophia's engagement, I'm reminded of the importance of family loyalty. I felt Sophia tensche besideme. Before we continue with this celebration," he continued, "I think it's time for a private family moment. Kevin, your mother and I, and Jackson, would like to speak with you briefly." The room fell awkwardly silent. James started to object, but I shook my head slightly. Better to get whatever this was over with privately. "I'll be right back," I whispered to Sophia, kissing her cheek. "James, would you mind if we used the small office adjacent to the dining room?" James nodded, concern evident in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need." I led my parents and Jackson to the small, elegantly appointed office. As soon as the door closed behind us, the atmosphere changed instantly. My father's forced smile disappeared, replaced by a calculating look. My mother wrung her hands nervously, while Jackson leaned against the wall with a smug expression. "Son," my father began, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he often used when he wanted something. "Your mother and I are so proud of the man you've become. Your success, your engagement to such a lovely girl from a good family, it's everything we've ever wanted for you." I waited for the other shoe to drop. "But family takes care of family," he continued. "And right now, your brother needs your help." My mother jumped in, tears already forming in her eyes. "Jackson's in real trouble, Kevin. He made some mistakes with the business, got involved with some bad people who loaned him money." I looked at Jackson, who was studying his fingernails instead of meeting my eyes. He needs $50,000 to pay these people back. My father said bluntly. We've done everything we can. Mortgaged the house to the limit. Used all our savings. You're the only one who can help now. The amount wasn't a coincidence. They knew exactly how much I had saved for the wedding. I felt a cold sensation spreading through my chest as I realized they had been planning this ambush for weeks. I can't give Jackson $50,000, I said firmly. That's my wedding fund. Sophia and I have been planning our wedding around that budget. My mother's tears flowed freely now. But this is life or death, Kevin. These men threatening Jackson, they're dangerous. I looked at Jackson skeptically. What kind of trouble are you actually in? He shrugged. I borrowed some money for the business. It didn't work out. Now they want it back with interest. So you gambled away business funds again, I said flatly. My father stepped forward. That doesn't matter now. What matters is that your brother needs help, and you have the means to help him. I've been saving that money for 5 years, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. 5 years of living frugally, working overtime, saying no to vacations and new cars and everything else I might have spent that money on. It's for my future. My wedding. My life with Sophia. You can always save up again, Jackson interjected. You make plenty of money. My mother grabbed my hands. If you really loved us, you'd do this for your brother, she pleaded. We've always given you everything. That was when something snapped inside me. Everything? I repeated incredulously. You've always given me everything? Years of suppressed feelings came flooding out. I reminded them how they had always favored Jackson, how I had worked multiple jobs through college while they paid Jackson's full tuition, how they had never once offered to help me financially, while constantly bailing out my brother. As I spoke, I could see my father's face growing redder, my mother's tears drying up, replaced by a cold stare. Jackson pushed off from the wall, moving closer to my father, as if seeking protection. You've been jealous of your brother your whole life, my father accused. We did the best we could for both of you. But Jackson needed more support. He's not as naturally gifted as you. And whose fault is that? I countered. I'm successful because I worked for it. Not because anything came naturally to me. Jackson has had every advantage, every bailout, and he still keeps making the same mistakes. The argument escalated, voices rising. I heard a knock at the door. Then Sophia's concerned voice calling my name. The door opened, and Sophia entered, followed by her parents. They took in the scene. Sophia's my father's flushed face, my mother's tear-stained cheeks, Jackson's defensive posture. Is everything okay? Sophia asked, moving to my side. No, my father said harshly. Your fiancé is refusing to help his brother in a time of crisis. He'd rather spend $50,000 on one day of celebration than save his brother from serious harm. Sophia's father stepped forward. I think we should all take a moment to calm down, he said in his measured, authoritative voice. Whatever's happening, there's surely a compromise to be found. There's no compromise, my father snapped. Either Kevin gives his brother the money, or we're not coming to the wedding. In fact, we'll withdraw our blessing from this engagement entirely. The room fell silent at the ultimatum. I felt Sophia's hand tighten around mine. You don't get to dictate terms for our wedding or our engagement, I said quietly but firmly. I'm sorry for whatever trouble Jackson is in, but I'm not giving him my entire wedding fund. I can help with a smaller amount, maybe $5,000. I never finished the sentence. My father's face contorted with rage, a vein visibly pulsing at his temple. For a split second, I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes, something I had never seen directed at me before. Then, without warning, his hand shot out in a wide arc, connecting with my cheek with a crack that echoed in the small room. The force of the slap knocked me back a step. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. The room went completely silent, everyone frozen in shock. No one, including me, could believe what had just happened. Sophia was the first to react, gasping and rushing to my side. Oh my God! Kevin! She gently touched my reddening cheek, her eyes wide with concern and disbelief. James, Sophia's father, immediately stepped between us and my family. his tall frame creating a physical barrier. "That is completely unacceptable," he said, his normally friendly voice now cold with controlled anger. My mother, instead of showing concern for me, moved to my father's side and placed a hand on his arm. "Thomas, not here," she murmured, looking anxiously at the door as if worried about what the other guests might have heard. Jackson, still leaning against the wall, actually smirked. The sight of that smirk crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about the money. This was about a lifetime of manipulation, favoritism, and toxic family dynamics that I had normalized and excused for far too long. In that moment of perfect clarity, a calm descended over me. The stinging in my cheek seemed to fade as I straightened up and looked my father directly in the eyes. "You're about to get a surprise you'll never forget," I said, my voice steady and quiet. I reached for my phone in my pocket. My mother's eyes widened as she realized what I was about to do. "Kevin, don't overreact," she pleaded, her voice no longer tearful but sharp with warning. "Your father didn't mean it. He's just upset because we're worried about Jackson." I ignored her, unlocking my phone and dialing 911. As the call connected, my father's expression changed from anger to disbelief. 911. "What's your emergency?" came the operator's voice. "I'd like to report an assault," I said clearly. "I'm at Azure Restaurant on Michigan Avenue, in a private room. My father just assaulted me during my engagement party." My father lunged forward. "You wouldn't dare call the cops on your own father," he growled. But James firmly held his ground, preventing my father from reaching me. Sophia's mother, Diana, who had been standing quietly near the door, spoke up. "I witnessed the assault, as did everyone in this room," she said loudly enough for the operator to hear. The operator asked if I needed medical attention, which I declined, and assured me officers would arrive shortly. When I ended the call, the room was still except for my mother's agitated movements. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "We're family. Family problems stay within the family. Not when they involve assault," Sophia said firmly. Still at my side. "Kevin has every right to press charges." My father, seeming to finally grasp the seriousness of the situation, tried to push past James toward the door. "We're leaving," he announced. "This has all been a misunderstanding." James didn't budge. "I think it would be best if you stayed until the officers arrive," he said calmly. "Otherwise, it might look like you're fleeing the scene." My father's face paled slightly at that. He glanced at my mother, who looked equally trapped and panicked. "Kevin," Jackson said, finally pushing away from the wall. "Let's talk this through like adults. There's no need to involve the police over a little family disagreement." "A little family disagreement?" Sophia repeated incredulously. "Your father physically assaulted Kevin at his own engagement party because he wouldn't give you his wedding savings. That's not a disagreement, that's a crime." Jackson took a step toward me, his expression darkening. "You've always been so full of yourself," he said bitterly. "So perfect, so successful. You think you're better than all of us." "I'm not better than anyone," I replied evenly. "I just want to live my life without being manipulated or guilt-tripped every time you get yourself into trouble. And I definitely don't deserve to be hit for saying no to giving you my wedding fund." The 15 minutes we waited for the police to arrive were excruciating. My parents kept alternating between threats and pleas, while Jackson made increasingly desperate attempts to get me to call off the police. James remained firmly positioned between my family and the door, while Diana had quietly slipped out to manage the concerned guests in the main room. Sophia never left my side, her hand in mine a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this. We had started the evening celebrating our future together, and now we were united in facing one of the most difficult moments of my life. When the police finally arrived, they handled the situation with professional efficiency. 2 officers entered the room, introduced themselves, and immediately began taking statements from everyone present. My father initially tried to deny the slap, claiming it was just a tap on the cheek to snap me out of hysterics. "Sir, there are 5 witnesses here who say otherwise," one officer pointed out. "And one of them is a retired corporate attorney who knows the legal definition of assault quite well." My father fell silent at that, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. After gathering all the statements, the officers informed my father that he was being placed under arrest for simple assault. As they handcuffed him, my mother began sobbing dramatically, This is what you do to your own father?" she cried, looking at me accusingly. "After everything we've done for you?" The officers led my father toward the door. Before they exited, he turned back to me, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Don't come crawling back to us when you need something." My mother followed, still crying and casting reproachful glances at me. Jackson was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver his own parting shot. "You're dead to this family," he spat. "I hope that Princess and her rich family are worth it." Then they were gone, escorted through a back entrance to avoid disrupting the rest of the party guests. As the door closed behind them, I felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over me: guilt, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. Sophia squeezed my hand. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Her father approached, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry this happened, Kevin," he said sincerely. "But you did the right thing. No one has the right to physically harm you, family or not." I nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. We had an engagement party to return to, concerned guests to reassure, a celebration to salvage. But something fundamental had changed within me. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my family's toxic patterns and refused to be manipulated or abused. It hurt deeply. But beneath the pain was the certainty that I had done what was necessary to protect myself and my future with Sophia. Returning to the engagement party after the confrontation was one of the hardest things I've ever done. As Sophia and I walked back into the main room, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to us. The news of what had happened had clearly spread, despite Diana's best efforts to downplay the situation. I cleared my throat, summoning a smile that felt brittle but necessary. "First off, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate with us," I began. "Unfortunately, there was a family disagreement that got out of hand. My parents and brother have left early, but Sophia and I would love to continue celebrating with all of you." There was an awkward moment of silence. Then Adam raised his glass. "To Kevin and Sophia," he declared loudly. "May your marriage be filled with happiness, respect, and healthy boundaries." That broke the tension, drawing laughter and a chorus of toasts. Gradually, the party atmosphere returned. Though I noticed guests shooting concerned glances my way throughout the evening, I appreciated their attempts at normalcy more than they could know. Later that night, after all the guests had departed, Sophia and I sat in her parents' living room. They had insisted we come over, rather than return to our empty apartment alone. Diana had made hot tea and placed ice in a cloth for my cheek, which had developed a slight bruise. "I feel like I should apologize," I said finally, breaking the silence, "for ruining the party with my family drama." James shook his head firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for, son. Nothing at all." Sophia took my hand. "I'm just sorry you've had to deal with this kind of treatment from your family for so long," she said softly. "No one deserves that." I had always made excuses for my parents' behavior, I admitted. I told myself they were doing their best, that they loved both Jackson and me, but just showed it differently. I convinced myself that the favoritism I saw wasn't real, or that if it was, there must be a good reason for it. Diana's eyes were compassionate. "Many children from dysfunctional families do that," she said. "It's a survival mechanism. It's easier to excuse the behavior than to face the painful truth that your parents aren't treating you right." Sophia's parents offered practical support as well as emotional. James, with his connections, recommended an excellent lawyer to handle the legal aspects of the assault case. Diana, drawing on her background as an attorney, explained what to expect in the coming weeks. "You should consider a restraining order," she advised. "Even temporarily. Given your father's threat as he was leaving, it might be wise." I hesitated at that. A restraining order against my own father, it seemed so extreme, so final. Yet the memory of his face contorted with rage, the sting of his hand against my cheek, the cold threat in his voice as he was led away, all of it confirmed that this wasn't an isolated incident, but the culmination of a lifetime of unhealthy family dynamics. That night, Sophia and I lay in the guest bedroom of her parents' home, talking in low voices about everything that had happened. "I keep thinking I should have seen this coming," I said, staring at the ceiling. All the signs were there, their increasing interest in my finances, the guilt trips, Jackson suddenly appearing at every family gathering. "You wanted to believe the best about your family," Sophia replied, curling against me. "That's not a character flaw, Kevin. It's a testament to your capacity for love and forgiveness. But now that you see the pattern clearly, you can make different choices going forward." She was right. The next morning, I called the lawyer James had recommended and began the process of filing for a restraining order against my father. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. The lawyer also advised me to document any further contact attempts from any family members, especially if they were threatening or manipulative in nature. I didn't have to wait long. By that afternoon, Jackson had begun his campaign of harassment. Text messages flooded my phone, alternating between guilt trips, insults, and vague threats. "You've destroyed this family," one text read. "Dad might lose his job if this gets out. Mom hasn't stopped crying. All because you're too selfish to help your own brother." I didn't respond, instead forwarding each message to my lawyer as advised. Later that day, the texts became more threatening. "You think you're safe hiding behind Sophia's rich daddy? Wait till he finds out what you're really like. I've got stories about you that would make him cancel the wedding in a heartbeat." This was pure bluff. I had nothing to hide, but it showed the lengths to which Jackson would go to manipulate and threaten me. Through my lawyer, I learned some disturbing information about my parents' financial situation. They had indeed remortgaged their house, not once, but twice in the past year. They had also taken out personal loans and maxed out multiple credit cards. But contrary to what they had told me, very little of this money had gone to legitimate business expenses for Jackson. Most had been used to pay off his gambling debts or to fund a lavish lifestyle he couldn't afford on his own. My mother began calling me multiple times a day, leaving voicemails that evolved from tearful pleas to drop the charges against my father to bitter accusations about my ingratitude and betrayal. She even tried to contact Sophia at her workplace, prompting us to alert security there as well. We learned that my father had accepted a plea deal for the assault charges, a fine, community service, and anger management classes. It was a fair outcome, and I had made it clear to the prosecutor that I wasn't seeking jail time, just accountability. My father, however, viewed it as a profound humiliation, one for which he blamed me entirely. As we continued with our wedding planning, trying to focus on our future rather than the painful present, I received support from unexpected quarters. My father's sister, Aunt Linda, called me out of the blue. "I've been watching this situation from a distance," she said, "and I want you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you did the wrong thing. Your parents have always had a blind spot when it comes to Jackson, and it's done neither of you any favors." Her support meant more than she could know. She even offered to take on some of the traditional mother of the groom responsibilities for the wedding, a gesture that brought tears to my eyes. Colleagues and friends rallied around us as well. My team at work organized a surprise engagement lunch. Sophia's friends threw her the bridal shower her mother would normally have organized. These acts of kindness reinforced that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about people who care for and support each other. The most difficult decision came when we sat down to finalize our wedding guest list and realized we needed to decide whether to invite my parents and Jackson. After much soul-searching and discussion, we agreed that having them present would cast a shadow over what should be the happiest day of our lives. I wrote them a letter explaining our decision, setting clear boundaries but also leaving the door open for reconciliation if they were willing to acknowledge their behavior and commit to changing it. I didn't expect a positive response, but I needed to know I had made the attempt. 3 weeks before the wedding, Jackson showed up at my office building. Security had been alerted about possible harassment from my family, so they prevented him from coming up to my floor. But the incident shook me. It was a stark reminder that the boundaries I was setting weren't being respected. A week later, a thick envelope arrived from my parents. Inside was a lengthy letter filled with accusations, justifications, and thinly veiled threats about what would happen if I went through with the wedding without them. It was the final confirmation that our decision to exclude them had been the right one, painful though it was. Through all of this turmoil, My relationship with Sophia only grew stronger. She witnessed me at my most vulnerable, dealing with family trauma and setting difficult boundaries, and never once wavered in her support. Her parents, too, became rocks of stability in a turbulent time, offering practical advice, emotional support, and occasional much-needed distraction. As our wedding day approached, I found myself focusing less on what I had lost and more on what I had gained: clarity, self-respect, and a future with a woman and a family who truly respected and loved me. The cost had been high, but the liberation from toxic family patterns was worth it. The day after our engagement party fiasco, Sophia and I returned to the apartment we shared, both exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the previous night. Our home, usually our sanctuary, felt different, somehow vulnerable, as if the outside world with all its complications had breached our safe space. "We should probably talk about what this means for our wedding plans," Sophia said gently, curling up beside me on the couch. I nodded, feeling a weight on my chest. "Do you still want to marry into this mess?" I asked, only half joking. "My family just showed you their true colors in the most dramatic way possible." Sophia took my face in her hands, careful of my bruised cheek. "Kevin Reynolds, I'm not marrying your family. I'm marrying you. I'm marrying you. And what I saw yesterday was you finally standing up for yourself against people who have taken advantage of your generosity for years. If anything, it makes me more certain about marrying you." Her words were a balm to my raw emotions. We spent that evening talking through practical considerations: how to handle the legal process, whether to proceed with our original wedding plans, how to manage any further contact attempts from my family. The next morning, reality intruded in the form of a barrage of text messages from Jackson. Each was more accusatory than the last, culminating in one that read, "You chose those rich strangers over your real family. You'll regret this when you need us." I showed the messages to Sophia, who frowned. "You should document all of these," she advised. "If we need to extend the restraining order to include Jackson, these will help build the case." She was right, of course. I created a folder on my computer to save screenshots of every communication attempt. It filled up alarmingly quickly. My mother began calling Sophia's workplace, trying to speak to her directly. When that failed, she started sending emails to Sophia's work address, alternating between pleading with her to help reconcile the family and implying that she didn't know the real me. Sophia forwarded all these emails to me without reading them fully. "I don't need to hear their version of you," she said firmly. "I know who you are." Meanwhile, life continued. We both had demanding careers that required our attention despite the personal turmoil. My team at work noticed my distraction, and my manager pulled me aside to check if everything was okay. After a moment's hesitation, I gave her a brief overview of the situation. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "Family issues can be all-consuming. Just let me know how I can help." Her understanding was another reminder that not all relationships had to be as complicated and conditional as my family's love had been. 2 weeks after the engagement party, we attended the court hearing for my father's assault case. Sitting in that courtroom, watching my father in his carefully pressed suit, his expression a mask of injured dignity, was surreal. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had attended my high school graduation, who had called to congratulate me on every promotion. He was also the man who had consistently prioritized my brother's needs over mine, who had tried to guilt me into giving away my wedding savings, who had slapped me in front of my future in-laws. The judge accepted the plea deal: a fine, community service hours, and mandatory anger management classes. As the terms were read out, my father stared straight ahead, refusing to look in my direction. My mother, seated behind him, alternated between dabbing at her eyes theatrically and shooting venomous glances at me and Sophia. After the hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, my mother approached us, ignoring the restraining order conditions that should have kept her at a distance. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed, her normally carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. "You've humiliated your father in front of the whole community. His colleagues at the firm are whispering about him. This could cost him his partnership." "Mrs. Reynolds," Sophia interjected calmly. You need to maintain the distance specified in the restraining order. We don't want to have to report a violation. My mother's face contorted with anger, but a court officer had noticed the interaction and was heading our way. With a final glare, she turned and hurried back to where my father was waiting by their car. The encounter left me shaken. Despite everything, these were still my parents. I had spent 3 decades of my life loving them, seeking their approval, making excuses for their behavior. Cutting those emotional ties wasn't as simple as signing a legal document. That evening, Sophia found me staring at old family photos on my laptop. She sat beside me silently, looking at images of happier times, birthday parties, vacations, holiday gatherings where everyone was smiling, the underlying tensions invisible to the camera's eye. It's okay to mourn what you've lost, she said softly, and it's okay to remember the good times too. Relationships are complicated, and your feelings can be too. Her permission to feel everything, the anger, the sadness, the nostalgia, the relief, unlocked something in me. For the first time since the engagement party, I allowed myself to cry, truly cry for the family relationships that had been broken, perhaps irreparably. Sophia held me through it, not trying to fix it or rush me through the grief, just witnessing it with compassion. When the storm of emotions had passed, I felt lighter somehow, more certain of the path forward. The next morning, I called a therapist whose name I had been carrying around for weeks but hadn't found the courage to contact. It was time to process not just the recent trauma, but the patterns of a lifetime. Meanwhile, wedding planning continued. We decided to keep our original date and venue, refusing to let my family's actions derail our plans. Sophia's parents were incredibly supportive, offering to increase their contribution to the wedding budget if needed, though I assured them my savings were still intact. The question of who would fulfill traditional family roles at the wedding loomed large. Who would walk Sophia down the aisle? James, her father, would do that. But who would stand as my best man? Who would handle the mother of the groom duties? Adam, my best friend since college, stepped up immediately when I asked him to be my best man. He had been there through so much of my life, had witnessed the family dynamics firsthand over the years, and understood better than most why I had finally drawn this line in the sand. My Aunt Linda called one evening, having heard about the situation from extended family members. I haven't spoken to your parents yet, she said. I wanted to hear your side first. I appreciated her fairness and told her the whole story, not sparing any details. To my relief, she didn't immediately defend my parents or try to minimize what had happened. I can't say I'm completely surprised, she sighed when I had finished. Your mother and father have always had a blind spot when it comes to Jackson. It started when he was born with those health issues, and they never readjusted even after he recovered. Her words shed new light on my childhood experiences. Jackson had been born with a heart condition that required surgery in his infancy. I had vague memories of hospital visits and my parents' fear. But the condition had been fully corrected by the time he was a toddler. I had never connected this early health scare to their persistent favoritism. I think they started seeing him as fragile, Linda explained. And you as the strong one who didn't need as much support or attention. It wasn't fair to you. But I don't think they even realize they're doing it. Understanding the possible origins of the favoritism didn't excuse it, but it did help me contextualize it. My aunt offered to take on some of the traditional mother of the groom duties for the wedding, a gesture that meant more than she could know. As the wedding date approached, we had to make the final, difficult decision about whether to invite my parents and Jackson. We sat down with our guest list one evening, both dreading this particular conversation. If they were anyone else, would we want them at our wedding? Sophia asked pragmatically. I considered the question. If they were just acquaintances who had behaved this way, showing up at our engagement party with ulterior motives, attempting to extort money, resorting to physical violence when refused, the answer was obvious. We wouldn't want such people anywhere near our special day. I think we have our answer, I said quietly. Sophia nodded, her expression compassionate. It doesn't have to be forever, she reminded me. Just for now, while the wounds are still fresh and they haven't shown any real remorse or desire to change. I wrote a letter to my parents explaining our decision. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever written, but I was determined to be clear, firm, and fair. I explained that their behavior at the engagement party had broken trust in a fundamental way, that their subsequent actions had shown no recognition of the harm they had caused, and that we didn't feel their presence at our wedding would contribute to the joyful, supportive atmosphere we were trying to create. I left the door open for future reconciliation, but with conditions. Acknowledgement of the harm done, a genuine apology, and a commitment to respecting our boundaries going forward. I mailed the letter with a heavy heart, but also a sense of having done what was necessary to protect our special day. The response came in the form of a lengthy, rambling letter from my mother, filled with accusations, justifications, and thinly veiled threats about what would happen if I went through with the wedding without them. Every sentence confirmed that our decision had been the right one, painful though it was. A week before the wedding, Jackson showed up at my workplace. Security had been alerted about the situation and prevented him from coming up to my office. But the incident was disturbing. It showed that despite all the legal boundaries we had put in place, my family was still unwilling to respect my decisions or my space. When I got home that evening and told Sophia about Jackson's appearance at my office, she wrapped her arms around me tightly. "It's almost over," she whispered. "In a week, we'll be married and on our honeymoon, far away from all of this." She was right, of course. We just had to get through one more week. The final dress fittings, the rehearsal dinner, the last-minute details, all these normal pre-wedding stressors seemed insignificant compared to what we had already navigated together. The night before our wedding, as tradition dictated, we sleep apart. I lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain of standing up to my family was still fresh, but it was outweighed by the certainty that I was making the right choice in marrying Sophia and creating healthy boundaries for our future together. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating joys together. With that comforting thought, I finally drifted off to sleep, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright. One of those perfect fall days in Chicago, when the air is crisp, but the sun is warm. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie for the 10th time, I felt a mixture of emotions, joy, anticipation, a touch of sadness, but mostly a profound sense of rightness. Despite everything that had happened, this day was about Sophia and me, about the life we were choosing to build together. The ceremony was held at a beautiful old stone chapel near the lake, with tall stained glass windows that cast multicolored light across the polished wooden pews. As I stood at the altar, Adam beside me as best man, I scanned the gathered faces of our friends and loved ones. Sophia's side was full, her large extended family, childhood friends, college roommates, all beaming with happiness for her. My side was smaller but no less meaningful. Colleagues who had become friends. Adam's family who had practically adopted me during college. My Aunt Linda and a few cousins who had chosen to support me, despite pressure from my parents. The empty spaces where my immediate family should have been didn't hurt as much as I had feared they might. When the music changed and the doors opened to reveal Sophia on her father's arm, everything else faded away. She was radiant in a simple, elegant gown that caught the light as she moved. Her smile, when our eyes met, was full of such love and certainty that any lingering doubts I might have harbored about our decision to exclude my parents vanished completely. This moment, this commitment, was too sacred to be tainted by their manipulation and drama. James walked Sophia down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes. When the minister asked who gives this woman to be married, his voice was strong and clear. "Her mother and I do, with all our love and blessing." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. We had written our own vows, promises to support each other through life's joys and challenges, to communicate honestly, to prioritize our relationship while allowing each other room to grow as individuals. When I slipped the ring onto Sophia's finger, my hands were steady, my heart full. At the reception, held in a beautifully restored historic building overlooking the lake, James gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes, including my own. "When a man marries, he doesn't just gain a wife, he gains a whole new family," he said, raising his glass. "Kevin, from the first day Sophia brought you home, we have considered you a son. Today just makes it official. We couldn't be prouder to welcome you into our family." Adam's toast as best man was both funny and touching, recounting our friendship through the years and ending with a heartfelt tribute to the strength I had shown in recent months. "I've always known Kevin was a good man," he concluded. "But watching him navigate these past few months with such grace, integrity, and courage has shown me he's also a great man. Sophia, you've got a keeper." The evening was everything we had hoped for, dancing until our feet hurt. Conversations with beloved friends. Quiet moments stolen in corners to take it all in. If there was a shadow over the celebration from the absence of my parents and brother, it was far outweighed by the genuine love and support that surrounded us. As we prepared to leave for our honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Italy that we had planned before all the family drama erupted, Aunt Linda pulled me aside. She pressed an envelope into my hand. "This might not be the right time," she said quietly. "If it isn't, just put it away until you're ready." "But I thought you should know." I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, thanked her with a hug, and joined Sophia for our grand exit. Guests showering us with eco-friendly confetti as we ran to the waiting car. It wasn't until we were settled on the plane the next day, somewhere over the Atlantic, that I remembered the envelope. Sophia was asleep beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, exhausted from the emotional whirlwind of the previous days. I carefully extracted the envelope from my carry-on bag and opened it. Inside was a letter from my aunt, along with several old photographs I had never seen before. The letter began simply, "Dear Kevin, there are things about your parents that you should know, things that might help you understand, even if they don't excuse what has happened." She went on to explain that my father had grown up with an alcoholic, abusive father who had frequently used physical violence to control his family. My grandfather, who had died before I was born, had been a domineering presence in their home, quick to anger and slow to forgive. My father had sworn he would never be like his father, would never resort to violence, would always control his temper. Until the engagement party, he had kept that promise, at least outwardly. But the patterns of manipulation, favoritism, and control had persisted, passed down without him even realizing it. Jackson's early health problems had given my parents a justification for their favoritism, a way to tell themselves they were just giving extra attention to the child who needed it more. "None of this excuses what they did to you," Linda wrote. "But sometimes understanding where behaviors come from can help in the healing process. Your father broke his most sacred promise to himself when he struck you. I believe that's why he's fighting so hard against acknowledging it. It forces him to face the fact that he has become what he most feared." The letter continued, explaining more family history, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. It ended with a reminder that healing from family trauma takes time, and that whatever relationship I chose to have or not have with my parents going forward, I deserve to be treated with respect and love. I read the letter twice more during the flight, each time seeing my childhood and family dynamics in a slightly different light. It didn't change my decision to establish firm boundaries with my parents, but it did add layers of complexity to my understanding of how we had arrived at this painful juncture. Our honeymoon became a time of healing, as well as celebration, walking the ancient streets of Rome, getting lost in Venice's winding canals, drinking wine at sunset in a Tuscan vineyard. We created new memories to balance the difficult ones of recent months. Sophia and I talked about everything about family patterns we wanted to break, about how we would handle conflict in our own relationship, about our hopes and fears for the future. By the time we returned to Chicago, I felt renewed, ready to face whatever came next. What came next, surprisingly, was a letter from my father. It was waiting in our mail, his familiar handwriting on the envelope sending a jolt through me when I saw it. Sophia watched me carefully as I opened it, ready to support me whatever it contained. The letter inside was brief, just half a page, but it represented something I had never received from my father before: an apology. It wasn't perfect by any means. There were still justifications mixed in with the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But it was a start, a tiny crack in the wall of denial that had characterized his response until now. "I hit you, and that was wrong," he wrote. "No matter what the circumstances, I should never have resorted to violence. The anger management classes I've been attending have made me see that I've been carrying anger from my own childhood that has nothing to do with you. This doesn't excuse what I did, but I hope it helps explain it. He ended by saying he respected my decision to exclude them from the wedding, but hoped that someday we might find a way to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. I showed the letter to Sophia, who read it thoughtfully before handing it back. "What do you think?" she asked. "Do you want to respond?" I thought about it for several days before composing a reply. I acknowledged his apology and expressed appreciation for his willingness to begin looking at the patterns that had led to our current situation. I reiterated my boundaries: new financial support for Jackson, new guilt trips, respectful treatment of Sophia and her family, but also indicated my openness to a gradual rebuilding of our relationship if he continued to do the work on himself. This exchange marked the beginning of a slow, often difficult process of redefining my relationship with my parents. My mother initially rejected the new boundaries, continuing to call and email with guilt-inducing messages. My father, however, seemed genuinely committed to change, perhaps shocked into self-reflection by his own loss of control at the engagement party. Jackson remained the most resistant, unable or unwilling to see his role in the family dynamics, or to take responsibility for his financial choices. Over time, as my parents began to establish healthier patterns with me, his entitlement and manipulation became more apparent to them as well. Eventually, their enabling of his behavior decreased, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions more directly than he ever had before. 1 year after our wedding, Sophia and I celebrated our anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. As we reminisced about the tumultuous events leading up to our marriage, I realized how much had changed. In 12 months, I was still seeing a therapist regularly, working through the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships. My parents and I had established a cautious, limited relationship built around clear boundaries and expectations. We met for occasional lunches in public places, keeping conversations light and positive. It wasn't the warm, unrestricted relationship I had once hoped for, but it was honest and sustainable in a way our previous dynamic had never been. Sophia and I had settled into married life with a depth of understanding and communication that many couples take years to develop. Having navigated such a significant crisis together before our wedding had strengthened our bond and clarified our priorities. The biggest news, which we were still processing ourselves, was Sophia's pregnancy. We were going to be parents, a reality that filled me with both joy and trepidation. Would I know how to be a good father, having grown up with such complicated family dynamics? How would we handle relationships between our child and my parents? Therapy had helped me recognize that awareness was the first step in breaking generational patterns. By acknowledging the favoritism and manipulation that had characterized my childhood, I could consciously choose different patterns for my own parenting. Sophia and I talked openly about our fears and hopes, committed to creating a home environment built on consistency, fairness, and unconditional love. The journey of healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, when grief for what my family relationship could have been hit unexpectedly hard. But there was also growth, insight, and an increasing ability to hold the complexity of human relationships without needing simple answers or perfect resolutions. I learned that establishing boundaries wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. I learned that forgiveness didn't necessarily mean forgetting or returning to the way things had been. Most importantly, I learned that family is defined not by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual support. So what would I say to anyone watching who might be struggling with similar family dynamics? First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in how you're being treated, it probably is. Second, remember that love shouldn't come with manipulation, control, or conditions. Third, establishing boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. And finally, healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds, though it may not look the way you initially expected. As I look toward the future, I feel a sense of peace about the choices I've made. Standing up to my family was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most necessary for my own well-being and for the family Sophia and I are now creating. The $50,000 wedding fund that sparked so much conflict? It gave us a beautiful celebration to start our marriage. But the real gift was the clarity it brought about what truly matters in life, not money, not appearances, but genuine love and respect. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose their own well-being, even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, healthy relationships are always worth fighting for.